in a platform. It's designed mobile first, not mobile ready, mobile first. So it's designed for that use of students who might have 5 minutes to practice their English with, a quick game, for example. Of course, there's an online workbooks and platforms that teachers can go in and assess all of the skills that they would require. So, from the press side of things, making sure that we get resources that are fit for purpose, that's certainly something that we've been working on behind the scenes over the last 18 months, I'd say. But it's really, trying to get that motivation from the students. Dr. Sahar, you were mentioning as well about, that face-to-face interaction is so important, and the mannerisms that you might have, and trying to get that included. You'll see as well, I'm doing lots of facial expressions. I'm using my hands a lot to try and kind of stimulate that interaction as if we were all on a stage right now. So it's just trying to embed those and to all of the accounts we work with. And that's why we make sure that it's mandatory for any institution that use Cambridge resources that they have a training on the digital side, the digital platform. I think before COVID, it was maybe an optional. The fantastic resources were there. Institutions might choose to dip in if they want, dip out. But I think now that hybrid model of teaching and learning is here to stay. And we need to make sure that we train the teachers and institutions so that they feel confident that they can basically pass the training on to their students and make sure that everyone gets the value of the resources.
Thanks, Josh. Whenever we talk about high, advanced technology used in the classroom, always the first thing that comes to my mind is accessibility and how, user-friendly, not only in terms of the content and the materials and the resources, but how accessible in the sense that, you mentioned the example in Oman and how the infrastructure itself varies from one place to another. I think there are new themes that basically starting to appear, like digital literacy, digital poverty as well, on the other hand. So there are lots of key challenges as well, I think, that we'll always see with these new shifts that basically we're moving into.
Zayed University. Zayed University has 2 campuses, Abu Dhabi and Dubai. We are the youngest of the 3 federal institutions in the UAE, and we offer students a technology-rich learning environment. So technology is in our DNA as an institution. Online course access through our LMS has always been there. Our materials are digitized. Every single course material is on the LMS. A lot of our exams are also conducted with technology. So the online component was not a challenge at all for training on video software that was mandated by our university for the delivery of the online classes. But I have to say that despite that readiness and despite that abundance of technology and technology support, and as you know, the UAE is quite an affluent country, so our students also had access to technology, so there was not any question of equity, some students having technology and some students not having technology. We're all ready and equipped with the skills and the resources we needed to switch to that. I would not call it online learning. It is really emergency remote teaching and learning, because all the courses that we delivered online were not really designed to be delivered online. Yes, they're available on an LMS. Yes, our resources are all digitized, but they were created to be delivered in a classroom face-to-face. And I think That's the difference between what we were doing, the emergency remote teaching, and what an online course, a course designed to be delivered completely online. There was a gap in there, and the gap was primarily in the materials. Materials do not just need to be digitized to be fit for an online delivery and online teaching and learning. Materials that were created for a face-to-face classroom, even if they're digital, they were not necessarily a good fit for an online delivery. So we put our emphasis and our focus on helping faculty redesign or rethink some of the activities that they would be doing in classroom. And now they have to switch to an online environment. They'd have to rethink particular activities to make them more effective for that online environment. We try to make use of different examples and theories, and we incorporated that in our very intensive faculty training, professional development courses that we delivered to help them try to engage the students with as much interactivity built into this online delivery that they had to do during the COVID pandemic. When it came to assessment, as I said, a lot of our assessment was happening with technology anyway, but again, it was happening in a classroom in front of faculty who are there not only to catch cheaters, but also to create a very supportive environment for the students during the exam, making sure that there are no issues with technology, that if there were issues, that somebody was at hand to solve them. You can imagine students taking an exam from a machine and with a network at their home, they come across a technology challenge. They are there on their own. The teacher cannot do something, from across the network. Of course, other logistical aspects of the exam were fine, like timekeeping, for example, or if a student had a question about the assessment, they could always ask the teacher through the video conferencing software. But it created other challenges. For example, and I noted one of our participants asked the question about the camera in a culture where females, Muslim females, do not like to show their faces, do not like to have the camera on. So that created challenges. Do we push the females to turn on their camera? And all our students are female, by the way, female Emirati. So it was, it created a huge challenge for us in an exam situation. Another one was that when you are in the classroom proctoring students, you're proctoring at a distance, and from time to time, you approach students, but then you walk by. So you never have a very imposing presence in front of the student when they are being examined. But doing an examination through a video conferencing software with the teacher's face right there, it does feel a lot as if the proctor, the teacher, is actually sitting right in front of you, looking at you the whole time. That creates unnecessary stress to the student who may not be so familiar with being examined online at a distance with a proctor through a video conferencing camera. And of course, the integrity, the academic integrity, as my colleagues before me mentioned, to what extent can we guarantee that the exam is not just valid and reliable, but that the person is not engaging themselves in improper contact, such as having someone else take the test for them, or using a book to find the answers, or using another device to look for the answers online, and so on and so forth. So at my center, our team, members of our team have actually investigated e-proctoring software, so software that allow for e-proctoring, which is much more sophisticated than simply turning on a camera in a video conferencing software like Zoom. E-proctoring software helps detect unusual patterns in a student's behavior. So are they looking somewhere where they shouldn't be looking? They should be looking at the screen when they're taking an online test. Are there any sounds of the student turning pages on a book? Or is the student turning to work on a different technology, on a different machine altogether? And then alert the proctor of these behaviors so that the proctor can then investigate. And I think moving forward, this is definitely something we need to look at. So just having a digitized exam, just having a camera on and putting a teacher in front of the camera does not solve. It could even create more problems when it comes to assessment. But I'm sure we'll get a chance later on to talk about the future of assessment. So yes, these were our challenges. And of course, we've now been in this mode for 14, 15 months. And I think there has been a lot of progress that was made in the confidence of faculty that not just in the delivery, but on making sure that the learning happens at a distance. I think the colleagues before me mentioned about challenges with the students, and our challenges with the students was with sustaining that motivation and engagement. When you go in the classroom, you meet with your classmates, you have the teacher there, it is a different feeling and engagement to now being autonomous, self-reliant, self-motivated to actually come into the class, switch on the camera and participate in the activities. So sustaining that motivation and engagement has been challenging. But also, I want to say that when the new academic year started, it posed an extra challenge for us, and that was we had new students coming in, and those students joined from the privacy of their own home, of their own room. They never met their classmates in face-to-face, in person. They never met their teacher face-to-face, in person. And we found that it took a lot longer to create that sense of community amongst our students with the start of the new academic year and new students joining in, which again goes to show that yes, we can do everything online, but there is still value in that face-to-face element when it comes to teaching and learning. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Christina. Georges, everybody is waiting to hear your thoughts on the same.
Right, so it's good and bad to be the last speaker because everybody has talked about everything, so I had to take so many notes. So thank you everyone for making me take notes so early. All right, so primarily, the challenges that we face. So I work in a small private university in Saudi Arabia, so we didn't have all of these, let me say, huge issues, but we tackled them, and we came up with ideas such as, open book exams and things that we can do online, and email exams by email, because the numbers were smaller and we didn't have enough time or the resources at the time to have proper online assessment and e-proctoring and so on and so forth. So, and as Jessica, I think, said, the historical data shows that there was not a significant change in our grades. So I think we can tap ourselves in the back that we did a good job, at least for these 14, 15 months. But come next semester, I think things will shift in a sense. Something that I wanted to say, and most likely it's most likely common for most of us, is that we don't have the liberty, at least in the country that I am, to take major decisions. The decisions are mandated by the Ministry of Education. So although we may need to, we want to make some changes, usually there is a directive and you cannot go left or right. You have to follow those rules. And that sometimes is beneficial, some other times is challenging for the institutions to abide. Now, some comments that I have for online assessment is that all of us are here in tertiary education. I think that online assessment has to start early. And as Philip and Joshua said earlier, it has to go through gamification. So and that's a significant element of future of online assessment, I think we'll go away from those huge online exams and things are going to be chopped down, more project-based approach, more, children will be used to it when they come to the university. Because my point is that online education has taken like a huge exposure around the world now, and usually when things get pushed, things get innovation comes earlier, and I think Christina talked about that earlier. Now it will be a bumpy road, and we've all seen all the hurdles that we had to go through. But I think with resilience, with innovation, with lots of help and support from publishers, from everywhere, I think we made it through. Now, a couple of more things I just wanted to say. Cheating was mentioned in the chat box and from colleagues for the browser lockdown, the features and all that. I think it's going to get better. I think, unfortunately, as innovative as we are, I think students are innovative in cheating as well. So we can see that in many different aspects, face-to-face, online. Even if you put them in the moon, they'll find a way to cheat. So I think we don't need to stress so much on cheating. This is something that I wanted to share with you. We should stress more on having smaller assessments, on having assessments that can show a product rather than A, B, C, D, and they select. So this is something I think we need to work on. And I've been working with project-based approach for many, many years. And this is something that we've always stressed to our faculty and students. Now, somebody mentioned, and I think Christina talked about also culture. So culture is integrated in our teaching, right? And then also digital literacy and digital poverty. And do they have internet? Do they have fast internet? I think models will be explored, and they have been, with low bandwidth requirements, with synchronous and asynchronous activities, and things that students can do at home and they can come. We talked about flipped learning. We talked about all sorts of elements in online assessment. I also, the last thing I'm going to say about technology and online assessment is I think that in the future, AR and ER are going to be prevalent, and 5G is going to help. 5G is going to bring new services to education. And there's lots of information on. It's something that is new, but it's something that has been, introduced, and education will benefit from 5G services, artificial intelligence, and the technology that's going to go there. It's going to make our life easier. But it's just imagine when electricity was invented, things are changing, or when the telephone was invented, right? So I think we're in a big change, and we should be prepared and innovative and try new things, because this is the road for the future.
Great, thank you very much, Georges. And that takes me to the second point on the agenda, which is something that you touched upon, which is postponing high-stake exams to another date, or I was involved in a number of research papers that highlighted the role of formative assessment in the future and how formative assessment could replace summative assessment. Now taking probably a little bit deeper dive into the pedagogical aspects of assessment, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this very point, which is, can the stakes of all exams be reduced during crisis? And can high-stake assessments be postponed? And with that, what are the concerns and the issues that you would envision associated with postponing or altering assessment programs? I'll make it as a free flow. So if you've got any point, if you feel that basically you are happy to take on this question, please feel free, in no particular order.
Shall I go?
Yeah, please,
please
do.
I think my answer to this is almost the way I ended up in my previous answer. High stakes exams will disappear, but not the idea that there will be high stakes requirements for university entry or whatever. There will be different ways that is, and it's to do with how assessment will go. And we've touched on that now with the thing. Lots of questions here about, is online assessment doable? And it's all about taking what we traditionally do as a high stakes drop dead assessment, paper 3.5 hours writing or whatever it may be, and how do we shift that online? Well, you can't. And one of the biggest things we've seen, actually one of the biggest challenges we had, was so many shifts to online assessment created simplistic multiple choice quizzes, which had no deep level thinking, very surface, simplified. That's not the answer. The answer is looking at what is assessment, and what do we need to do with the assessment? What are we trying to assess? Breaking, I think Georges has said, breaking what we are trying to assess down into more modular parts, assessing those realistically, authentically, as Nicola earlier said. So, and building that accurate profile, a language profile of what a learner is, and ending up with a far, far more reliable, realistic view of a individual's language performance and ability than can ever be provided by a 3.5 high stakes exam. That is the future of assessment. Yeah. So the question is not, is online assessment doable? It's what should we be doing about assessment? What is the future of assessment? And Cambridge yourselves, I mean, the most, I think, important presentation, documentation I've seen coming out of Cambridge for years is this new learning-oriented assessment. It's hugely powerful. And as your own documentation shows on that, it's about having valid, reliable, ongoing data about an individual's language performance. And then you don't get all the questions about cheating, because you are building a ongoing profile. Yeah, somebody mentioned portfolio there. Portfolio, I don't think, is the answer. It's about a language profile. It's about how do I perform in my language. Yeah, and that is really going to be the future of language assessment, I believe, going forward. And if anybody hasn't seen the learning-oriented assessment, I'm sure Joshua can tell us more, please go into the site and see it, because that for me is about the future. My research has all been about dynamic assessment. Learning-oriented assessment, I think, falls under that dynamic umbrella. But that truly for me is what is the future assessment. High-stakes assessment, in the way we look at high-stakes assessment today, that'll disappear in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And what we should be doing as pedagogues is looking how we can bring the best out of what we do in the classroom on a day-to-day. How do we know the language ability of our students? Yeah, we know it through constant observation. Check all of those little elements can be brought into reliable, valid online assessment that feeds into a profile. And you look at some of these large gamification platforms which are all based on taking different pathways, meeting adaptive levels. Your pathway changes as you, depending on how you perform at these different if you like, high stake assessment crossroads. That is where we're going in the future. So this is where the gamification comes in, I believe. Yeah. So you start with your zero profile and you start testing out your language and the reading, listening. Somebody said, how do you do online listening assessment? The most fascinating example I've seen from one of our language teachers here was using Nearpod. And they had an embedded series of short videos, which then were paused and had to create like a pop-up form that went in. And some of the results that are shown from the work they're doing, and hopefully it's going to turn into a paper, showed that actually the reliability of the assessment they're doing matched the same level as they had been tested on in their recent IELTS sittings. So there are ways of doing assessment. If we, instead of getting fixated on online and trying to do the same thing online, we deconstruct what our assessment is and revision it all dynamically, learning oriented, thinking of our learners and how we can get the true picture of their language.
Thank you very much. Phil, any comments from other panelists? So I think, I mean,
I can make a comment. Oh, sorry.
Yes, of course.
Go ahead, Cyril, go.
Christina, yes, please.
Okay. Yes, I think for those of us that have been in the field of educational technology, using technology for teaching and learning, we always were very aware of the fact that technology is not transforming education as fast as it has transformed other sectors like business and industry. And education was always falling behind when it came to maximizing its benefits in terms of technology. And the big stumbling block was always assessment. Because yes, we try to teach in very innovative ways, trying to use whatever is the latest in technology and software in our teaching and learning. But then when it came to assessment, we, especially standardized high stakes assessment, they remained traditional, and they were always testing skills that were not necessarily those, or did not include the extra skills that students develop when they are learning with technology. Those almost went unnoticed. And that's why you had in the past all these reports from OECD that technology is not really making a difference in students' learning. It's because traditional assessment does not reflect adequately teaching and learning with technology, this digital era. So COVID and the situation it put us in, it actually had a positive after all in what? In that it pushed educators to rethink assessment. It put us in a difficult situation about how do you do assessment? And it led us to put a little bit more emphasis on formative assessment, continuous formative assessment, and the value of formative assessment, which is, of course, assessment for learning, just like learning-oriented assessment, another term for it, is that it provides students with immediate feedback. If it's an automated quiz that they do online, they immediately know what they did right, what they did wrong. If it is something that the teacher has to check, the teacher gives feedback much more frequently to the student than waiting for a high-stakes summative assessment at the end of the semester. It also forced educators to rethink assessment. So move away from a multiple choice, which of course makes it easier for the students to resort to ways that would be considered cheating. move away from such assessments and more towards the kinds of assessment also Phil mentioned, more project-based learning, more scenario-based learning, trying to do gamification, more portfolio-based assessment. So this had the benefit of the teacher actually being able to monitor more closely how each student is progressing along the semester, rather than wait for the mid-semester or the end of the semester exam to find out how the student has done. So all these are positives that have come out of this pressure that educators felt with the COVID situation, the emergency remote teaching. And of course, there are ways to minimize these fears and uneasiness that comes with online testing, all of course centered around integrity. For example, someone mentioned in the chat the plagiarism testing tools, which we have been using in the past anyway, but now it's even more important to use them on a regular basis. Another one that was mentioned by George earlier on was that moderation process. So after the exam, have a look. Did the students, were there students that performed extremely well in the exam and not according to what you expected them to do based on their previous performance? That then would cause some concern, and then you would investigate those students or their performance a little closely. But when you have that continuous formative assessment happening along the way throughout the semester, that really is enough for the teacher to get an idea of where the student is excelling, what the weaknesses, the weakest areas are, and then try to remedy those and provide additional support to the students. So it actually helped educators to keep a close eye to student progress and rethink assessment, and incorporate all sorts of different types of assessment that are also much more engaging than a high stakes multiple choice exam.
Thanks, Christina. Jessica, from your experience, I mean, I think just building on those two points that Phil and Christina mentioned regarding the move towards formative assessments and the reliability of assessments. I mean, you work really with students firsthand, and obviously you have you work with students that are basically transitioning from one stage in their education to another. So, how would you kind of assess that? How would you basically ensure that basically formative assessment really in that format, in that context, is really as a reliable tool as you can, confidently move forward, saying that, oh, this is what I want, and these are the results that basically we are moving forward. So, how reliable the whole thing is for your students at AUS?
Yeah, that's a very topical question, because we are, and I want to pick up on that word of deconstructing that Phil used, which is that we're moving towards creating new courses that will be. This wasn't COVID related; it was just kind of responding to our student interests. We were going to be doing this anyway, but we are in deconstructing what we currently offer to our students in terms of the courses. We are looking at every aspect of the course. Looking at the relevance of what our courses are for the context, using the authentic situations that the students will be experiencing at the university, much like Nicola said about the testing itself. We'll be looking to try and recreate that kind of authentic experience in the learning process for our students in the courses going forward. And definitely we will be looking at integrating a more formative assessment types into our curriculum in the new courses that we apply. You asked about can high stakes assessments be postponed originally, and that was a very interesting question, because one of the things that many US universities did, and one of the things that we initially did for spring 20, summer 20, and fall 20 was to offer students the opportunity to have a no pass option. So if a student had performed below their expected level, they had the opportunity to write to the registrar's office and ask to have a passing grade as opposed to a C- or a C. And that was in place for those 3 semesters. But I think in a way it's delaying problems that we're going to have to be dealing with in the fall. And I certainly get the feeling when we're looking at our enrollment, certainly there is a strong student enthusiasm for being part of higher education. I've heard of stories in the UK where a lot of students are taking a year out and choosing because the educational experience is not what they are or what they want it to be. But here I get a very strong feeling that many students are still choosing to be in higher education and to continue with their studies, irrespective of the mode of delivery. And I think that places a lot of responsibility on us in higher education to make sure that the changes that we make are helping the students to have a very enjoyable learning experience, beneficial, helping them to meet their course outcomes and objectives in a way which is not fixed to this high stakes situation, where their learning can happen irrespective of that and is measured constantly. And we're looking at a more, I think you mentioned it, Phil, this modular kind of assessment, where if a student is struggling in the first module, at that very time, their concerns will be addressed and they will receive the language support or the mentoring that they need to progress to the next stage. It could be that it's not necessarily language development that stops them from passing the first module. It could be they're just struggling to adjust from that transition from high school to university. So it could not just be language, it could be more support with their study skills as well. So I think this kind of more modular approach is going to highlight areas which are strengths of students and areas where students need support much more quickly and immediately. Similar to what Christina said about this immediacy of feedback using online testing, this quickness of response is very valuable to the learner. But I'll be able to give you an update in a year's time when we've implemented all of this in our new programs.
Brilliant. I look forward to that. Josh, in your experience, obviously in your line of work, you have a lot of resources at CEP related to formative assessment, and how do you evaluate their usefulness to higher education institutions that you basically work with?
Yeah, no, I'm just nodding in agreement with everyone that said. It's great as well that people are saying that there's, we're looking at taking away that kind of high stakes exam. Hopefully it's going to go away, because that's certainly the feeling kind of what we're working on, hence the development of the gamification, these quick check-ins with the students, even if they've got 5 minutes, so we can, as the educators, we can see where our students are facing most challenges, and we can help to address them. I was a teacher before I joined the publishing world. I don't have anywhere near as much experience as some people on these panels of 20 plus years, but I was using technology for check-in, for that formative assessment way back in 2013 with students actually from the Gulf region. And it was fascinating. There's obviously an element, for those of you that have played it, of Kahoot, where you've got, there's 4 options and there's an element of potentially guessing. But being the person in control, and if they get the answer correct, okay, why is it correct? And then going that little bit deeper in it and finding out why. So it's not just going slightly deeper than just having the guess. But it's also as well, I think, about changing the mindset and the expectations from the learner's point of view. We're discussing about, we think that this summative assessment is going to hopefully go in the next 20 years, maybe even sooner. When I was studying, I studied in the UK and also in America. And in the UK, when you're at university, it's very much, you have a piece of coursework and you have this big exam at the end of the year. So in between, you can kind of not take it easy, but you know that there's no real, that your grade isn't going to be affected with anything in particular until your coursework is submitted and this big exam at the end. Now in America, that was also for one of the classes something that was a reality, but we did weekly quizzes, which wasn't actually counting to your grade until 10 days before the end of the term, and the teacher turns around and says, I'm not going to do a summative, I'm not going to do the high stakes exam because it's pointless, because you're just going to forget it as soon as the exam's over. So I'm going to revert back to your weekly quizzes you've been doing for the last 10 weeks, and that is going to form the basis. And the shock in people's face, because either people didn't think it mattered, so they didn't particularly care. Obviously I cared and I had a good score, but it's about the students at the start of term. If we tell them of this shift, because they'll be used to this high stakes exam because they've done it, their parents have done it, their other family relations have done it. So it's about shifting that and saying, moving forward, this is what we're going to do, so that they're aware of it.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Georges, back to you if you've got any comments on the formative elements.
Yeah, I just want to mention something that I think it has been discussed a little bit, but media literacy or online literacy, because we talk about online assessment a lot, but we also need to make certain that our students as well as our teachers have the media literacy, right? So they know how to do things online. And also we need to make certain that they're flexible enough. And we talked about students and how did, the students that were never in the university, they joined back last August and they just became online students, right? And how does that affect their whole learning experience? And what are we doing in order to facilitate this process? As, I don't know, in most of our universities, there is a course like study skills, right? So I think we should make certain that media literacy is included in those courses, in the study skills, because the study skills that students needed to have before, they have changed in an online world, and that affects also online assessment. And I like Joshua's example of, like weekly quizzes and weekly assessments and all that, because that can be embedded into the whole learning process. It should not be something just at the end, but we all say those, and they might take 20 or 30 years to be implemented. So we need to make small changes that will contribute to that. And we need to make, Cambridge part of us, like help us and support us, and they already do. But people need to know that, high stakes tests are not panacea, are not everything. But something that we haven't really touched upon, I think, is where do those students go and work? And how does that affect where they work? So they get some degrees, they have this knowledge. Do we know what their expectations are? And through online assessments, do they achieve their course learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, et cetera, et cetera? And how did those get adjusted to be assessed online? I think this is something that Christina talked about earlier. So this is, I guess, a little bit of food for thought, just to get us into that aspect. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And that was actually my next point, which is how can we relate all these different changes that we're talking about, if they are to really take place officially and formally, how can we link them with the employability agenda of governments? I mean, that's really something fundamental. That my personal worry that basically we are talking about changes and how useful and effective all these measures that are taking place are, but I'm probably a little bit less optimistic about the speed of moving towards fully kind of integrated approaches with assessment within the learning process, simply because of the burdens on government agendas and employability recognition and things like that. So I'll take the last point that Georges talked about, and I'll share it with the panel if they've got any thoughts on the linkage. I think that's really an important element that basically we have to consider. Here I didn't get a chance to ask in the first round, so I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, I just want first of all to talk about what I was planning to say. There are 2-3 important questions. Let's consider them to be research questions for us educators and researchers to consider. These are, number one, how can we maximize the effectiveness of conducting online assessment whilst at the same time ensuring reliability and credibility? The second question is, how can we modify students' attitudes towards online assessment so that they are willing and ready to be exposed to such types of assessment? These 2 important research questions are worth our attention and investigation. Speaking of formative assessment, I would like to emphasize the importance of formative assessment. We should not rely on one final test to be conducted at the very end of each semester. Instead, we need to make sure that our formative assessment is conducted in such a way that students' abilities, students' skills are objectively measured. Rather than presenting students with a reading passage, which is followed by a number of multiple choice questions, we can ask them to do some readings and then summarize what they have read, to tell us what they think of what they have read. A book critic, for example, a movie critic, for example. I am also of the opinion that project work is extremely important. It is something which I personally have always used with my students, especially since the start of the pandemic. We, for example, in our communication skills class, have what we call a virtual exchange projects. Our students communicate with one university in Japan and another in the USA for one full semester. So it's not only it's not the summative assessment. Formative assessment is there. They don't rely on one reading passage which is followed by questions. No, they communicate online. They read, they write, they talk, they mention what they have learned and stuff like that. Project work is extremely important. Gamification is another point which has been mentioned by you today. Language games, all these points should be taken into consideration. Rather than relying heavily on one final test, we have to devise a variety of assessment activities which would enable us to assess our students' ability to communicate, to use language in stages of discourse. This is regarding the point which I wanted to mention earlier. And yes, I agree with Christina, I agree with Jessica, I agree with all of you regarding the point that when it comes to assessing our students, provision of regular feedback is important, is essential. As a student, I reserve the right to get to know of how my achievement was. This is extremely important. For us here to employ a diagnostic assessment approach would be helpful. Now, this is regarding the first point that I wanted to discuss earlier. Now, speaking of the points that you have just raised, employability, a very good question. Employability, when we teach students, we need to make sure that what we teach them is related to genuine life situations. We need to start with what we call needs analysis. We need to know what students